Trickle-down economics, what is it? Well, it's an idea that if you give money to the rich, the poor will, in some way, ultimately benefit. I think it's a philosophy which is morally bankrupt, and it's being pursued by Liz Truss and her Chancellor, Kwasi. That is the only way to interpret their economic plans. There is nothing for the poor, everything for the rich, at a time when we are facing a cost of living crisis. I don't quite understand how this is happening. We know, therefore, that Kwasi is morally bankrupt. We saw it actually on display at the Queen's funeral. There he was, giggling. He was playing around with something. There is speculation now that it's his phone. Certainly it was something in his pocket. He makes Matt Hancock look rather virtuous in the trouser department. And then during the 2-minute silence, his eyes, his movements were everywhere. He couldn't stay still. Somebody who cannot respect the Queen and who is caught on television, who doesn't have enough respect for himself to actually make sure that he's looking somber and controlled on television. Somebody who cannot do that, cannot possibly respect the rest of our country. We are being governed by a man without respect. The only thing he deserves at this stage now is utter and unrestrained ridicule. Truss, meanwhile, is lazy. We know this. We know about her notes to her civil servants. Too long, make it shorter. And we know from the practice that once she has digested her sentence, she can't stray off that sentence because she doesn't have a mind that somehow retains information. Again, I despair. Again, I think of her failure with geography, her failure to identify the correct sea, her failure to identify that Rostov-on-Don is part of Russia and not part of Ukraine, her idiocy in thinking that everything is geared to a belief in what she says. You say one thing, you often mean something slightly different. That is the nature of Stanislavski, that is the nature of life. Liz Truss, at this age now, still hasn't worked that out. And she thinks that all she has to do is speak a little louder. Poor person. I'm also concerned that my criticism of Truss and Kwasi will simply be met by quite a lot of people in the comments who will say, well, all Tories are bad. I don't believe that. I don't believe anybody is all bad. I believe Truss and Kwasi have features that can be redeemed. It's just a matter of finding them. But that doesn't mean we don't pause and single out those things which are wrong. We shouldn't stint on criticism, but we should hold out hope that things can change. As I say, I don't think all Tories are bad. I don't think all Conservatives are wrong. And I was terribly shocked to read again and again comments by people on the left supporting Liz Truss's candidacy in the thought that this is going to expose the failures in the Conservative system. How can anyone who loves this country impose a government like Truss's that will deliver nothing of value for the next 2 years? I do not know. Now one could say, oh, that's what happened with Johnson, but in fact, the Johnson government in many ways was a result of deluded ideas about Brexit. We haven't received any Brexit dividends. We haven't received any Brexit benefits, whatever people are saying. Oh, and by the way, if anybody is saying my cat is screaming for breakfast, it simply isn't true. My cat is just screaming because he wants to be on video. And ever since we were on television together, Bay believes that the moment I put on a camera, he should be there. And sometimes it's slightly difficult to get. Oh, here he comes. Here he comes. Well, he gives the he raises one's spirit a little, doesn't he? Come on, come and sit here. All right, there we are. We're discussing politics, Bay. We're discussing politics, and you're probably. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Right, but I am still optimistic, as I say. For example, I see Chris Heaton Harris in Northern Ireland, and I think there is somebody who can possibly negotiate his way forward. He can possibly do some good. He has skills. I see that the DCMS has got a new Secretary of State. Anybody must be better than Nadine Dorries. Now, of course, when Nadine Dorries was first appointed, I was quite optimistic. Here was somebody who did some writing. And yet, over the just under a year of her tenure, she seemed incapable of doing any writing. She certainly didn't write back letters, and and the voice that she used on Twitter was at odds with the voice that we saw in her novels. Like I'm looking at one now called The Children of Lovely Lane. It could have been written by a different person. And Nadine Dorries still has many questions to answer. And John Nicholson up in Scotland is still pressing for those answers. And there's quite a number of people dogging the pages of Twitter, trying to ensure that until Nadine Dorries answers those questions, she isn't remotely allowed into the House of Lords. So, yes, I have hope, but I am also slightly in despair, and that despair is made all the more tangible by what's happening in Russia. It shouldn't take our eye off the ball. We can't suddenly become millenarian and stop dealing with everyday life simply because we fear Mr. Putin may press the nuclear button. So, here's something to entertain us. There's a lady called Angela Levin, and she's going to be publishing a book about Queen Camilla in the next few days, I think within a week. And in this book, I am reliably informed that there's going to be passages dealing with Prince Andrew and Prince Andrew's efforts, apparently, to prevent King Charles from coming to the throne. If that is true, that will be scandalous indeed. But even the details which are reaching us about this book are pretty shocking. Andrew meddling and meddling and meddling. It's time that man was retired. He has done no good. He has simply done harm. It's time that he was shown the door.